If you have ever felt like you and your significant other are not on the same page when it comes to communication, then today's episode is one you definitely don't want to miss. You will probably even want to listen to it 2 or 3 times and, probably should share it with your partner as well. It's so good. Seriously, this is one of my favorite couples in the world. They're dear friends of mine. And today, my guests are Jocelyn and Aaron Freeman, also known as the couple that coaches couples, and the author of the new book coming very soon called The Argument Hangover. Like I said, these two have been in my life for the better part of a decade, and a few years ago, they really saw a gap in the coaching market and realized there really wasn't such a thing as personal development for your relationship. So, as with a lot of brilliant business ideas, they created it. And this episode today is packed with so many tangible tools that they've learned from not only their own experience, but from working with thousands of couples from around the globe and helping them communicate more effectively. So I know you're going to love it. Let's dive in. Welcome back to the podcast. This is my favorite thing ever when I get to share like my people on the show. And we were just saying before we turned on microphones, these two like friends of mine that I'm going to introduce you to in a moment have just like grown exponentially in the last few years. And we all really started our journeys of expansion and writing books and doing the things we're doing today, like together in the same season. And so like, we're the people that get to say we knew them when. And so Jocelyn and Aaron, we have another powerhouse man joining us today. So excited to have you here.
Oh, this is the best. We're truly honored because I really do listen to your podcast and you're one of my besties. So I'm like, yay, I'm so glad to be on here.
I didn't think I'd ever be on Powerhouse Women podcast. So number one, this is great. Number two, for all the listeners, probably when you listen to Elliot, it's the same. I'm going to preface with, if I get tons of energy and excitement, I'm just going to put that out there ahead of time.
Yeah, I mean, Aaron Freeman, if you do not know him already, is never lacking in energy or excitement. And it's one of the things I miss the most about not having you two in town anymore. You just recently went on a new adventure. Maybe we'll even get to dive into that a little bit. But we have you here for a really, really special reason. And this is, Aaron, there's only a few men who really make the cut to be on the show, but having you here as a couple is important for a few reasons. Number one, that's really the work that you are doing in the world, which I'm going to have you share about in a moment. But we have so many conversations within Powerhouse Women, and even the reason we started that series with Elliot, where, there's this partnership dynamic to being a powerhouse woman. And so we're going to unpack that today. We're going to talk about your new book and some of the tools that you offer to help us communicate better. But before we do that, take us back to really like the start of you as, a couple pursuing this big idea of your business and now everything that you are creating in the world. Because I know there's just even so much to relate to from that story.
I got really excited to share this story because we don't share this part of our story in very many podcasts for a number of reasons. But
Saved
one, we saved it for you.
Appreciate it.
But because all of you listening are committed to being a powerhouse woman in your life, in your business, interestingly, when we really first were getting together, it was in the beginning-ish, like I was a year into self-development. I was a year into entrepreneurship. Lindsay was she was the reason I entered any kind of, I met her in personal development, but then she invited me into entrepreneurship. And so I actually had ended a previous relationship. Lindsay, remember my previous relationship?
Oh yeah, we go back that far.
Yes. And I did not get to be my big self in that past relationship. I had to suppress myself, and he in a way made my assertiveness and my inspiration, and he made my desire for more kind of wrong in a way. Like it was weird because he kind of wanted it, but then he really resisted it. And so I shrunk down in that relationship. And then when I met Aaron, though, because it's not just like, oh, then I found the perfect man, which I think sometimes women are like, oh, maybe it's a different person. I need to change the person. he wasn't doing self-development, and I wasn't going to rush his timing on being open to that. And we could go into the whole conversation about how really I invited him in a different way and how he became a yes. But I want to share that we did not start off with like perfectly being great partners together. We had a lot we had to unlearn, relearn.
Oh, let me underscore with that one thing. Yeah, if you have an idea that you get with a partner that's a perfect match, I think that is sort of an unreasonable expectation. So you don't really just like start there. And as a powerhouse woman, right, you have evolved. And it's probably really clear to you that you've evolved much faster, even more recently. And you do probably have a different speed at which you're going to grow than your partner. So it's, again, not like we were in some magical place of compatibility. We have just been open to allowing the timing of each of us and then pursuing communication skills so that we both feel more understood, even beyond getting to some solution to a problem.
And we'll pause there, but then we could tell you about how that turned into a business and all the things.
Yeah. And that is so huge because whether it's a partner, a romantic partner, a business partner, even friendships, it's so important for people to hear the real stories because I think it's more seldom and more rare for the partners to be kind of at the same place on the same growth journey. And there won't ever be a time that one is sort of like at a different spot than the other. And that's honest. Once you set aside that expectation, I think it leaves the space for the person to show up and have their own journey, like you said. Mm-hmm. But it did end up, and this is so beautiful too, because you guys had to have the experience you did to really be able to relate to the couples you now serve. So go on and tell us now, how has that transpired in terms of the work you're doing now?
Well, we had been building a different business with you in health and wellness, and that's where we really learned a lot of entrepreneurship skills, and we created a vision and we were fired up by our vision. When we actually didn't intend to create this as a business right off the bat, when we really had worked through things in our relationship, number one, we saw an odd thing in the market. There was all this emphasis on the wedding, getting married. And of course, some people chose to do like preparing for marriage work, which is great. And a lot of people didn't even do it then. And then the other place people put attention on their relationship was in counseling once they're in crisis. Mm-hmm. And at the time, there wasn't really very many people at all coaching couples and doing things more proactively, like self-development for couples. And so that's when we created it. And so, of course, we underwent our own learning and growth and acquiring our skills and tools and creating a curriculum and all of those things. But it originally started of us just wanting to help some couples informally. And then more and more couples were like, can you help me? Can I pay? And then we learned about coaching programs and, of course, learn the entrepreneurship along the way. And where we've really fallen in love is like events and hosting couples events. And so we've been full-time in this for years now, which is pretty surreal that we get to support couples and like make a living doing that. It's really exciting.
Yeah, I just had so many flashbacks as you're sharing that story because, and it is, and this is, you guys, like we talk all the time about building your girl gang, and sometimes your girl gang does include like the amazing significant others that are along on this journey too. Mm-hmm. But truly, like these are two of the people that have been such an integral part of our journey in growing a business because they're people who understand like what it feels like when you're trying new things and learning new business ideas. And I can't underscore that enough. We talk about it all the time, just the power of that community. So how has that played out for you in terms of your growth as entrepreneurs? And then we're going to dig into some of the juicy partnership stuff. I'm like, that's what I really want to talk about. But how has community really helped to cause like your growth and expansion as a business?
It just becomes more fun. I mean, really, if you're only having success on your own, well, it's just not as fulfilling. You don't have that human need of contribution. So I think no matter what anyone does, and as a powerhouse woman, maybe you start to pursue something you're really passionate about, I realized at some point, what a discouraging thing to have what you were once passionate about become something that drains you or that you're frustrated out. I can't think of almost a worse thing. Mm-hmm. And sometimes entrepreneurship can definitely get like that. And when you're in the relationship space, it's like, oh, you get more of a personal feel about it. So as far as community, when you're real, when you're raw and you're authentic. And then for us, when we share our skills based on our own experience, and that makes a difference for people and that grows into a community, it keeps that aliveness, that contribution, that fun. I mean, that's why community to me.
I have a slightly different answer because I love yours. I love yours. But actually, I want to speak to the ways in which community can be very triggering.
Oh,
But in a good way.
Yeah.
So quick story. We were at Chris and Lori Harder's mastermind a year and a half ago now. They saw me share after a trigger in front of this room of people. I shared the story with you, right, Lindsay?
Yeah.
So we were at this mastermind. It was like even the second or third weekend. So it wasn't the first time being with these people, but I got very triggered by how many people were like close friends and they were wanting to take pictures together and they were sitting at lunch with each other and they were planning dinner together. And all of a sudden, I literally was so triggered and I wanted to leave. I mean, I was like, I'm unfriending everyone. I'm removing myself from the Facebook group. I don't even want to show up to the next weekend. I was very confronted by this community dynamic and what was happening. Now, of course, I had the tools to take a minute and I went to the bathroom and an amazing gal that was in the group actually just like held space for me for a minute while I was like, I'm triggered right now. And then we went to the hotel room and I was able to process the trigger because that's what we do as people who are in self-development. We don't run away from something. We really look at it. And so I actually was able to share the trigger once I processed, okay, this is actually coming from high school and college and not feeling cool and not being on the in crowd and really look at where that was coming from. And then I shared it with the whole group in front of the room because oddly, this is what was trippy. They did a voting thing at the end of the 3 most impactful people in the room, like throughout the whole mastermind. And I was one of the 3 people. And I was like, shut the front door. I was like, I thought everyone hated me. Like in my mind, not like in the cool crowd. And people didn't like me. All in all, whether I was voted that or not, in community, sometimes you're going to get triggered. And that's actually one of the benefits of community is the good moments, like you said, and the celebration and the fun, but also we transform by relationships. And it's not always people mirroring to us the great things about us.
Gosh, isn't that so true? I was literally having that conversation with the new mastermind group that we just kicked off yesterday about how that's something just to watch out for and know might be part of the journey. It might be part of your expansion in an environment like a mastermind. And that's really kind of the perfect segue as well to talk about because these triggers that you're talking about really show up a lot in the partnership dynamic and specific to, I think a lot of the women that I end up talking to, the dynamic could sound something like what you were sharing, Joss, about you are on this growth journey, either personal growth, business growth. Okay, my partner isn't on that journey. And whether it's a fear of outgrowing that partner or the partner can be, I was with a friend yesterday who's like, my spouse is my biggest hater, right? That was like her words that she used. Let's start to unpack just like this idea of how our partnerships really can probably do that same thing. They can be that mirror sometimes for us to see that inner work that we get to do and how we can actually create a space that those conversations can happen productively.
I want to give you an opportunity. Is there something I'm going to say?
Yeah, I mean, triggers is a huge part of our new book. And since you're going to the personal reflection part, that's a great place to look at triggers. So I think talking about the 3 parts to emotional trigger would be a great place to start down the conversation.
I'm like, yes, give me all of that. I'll just be over here taking notes. Great.
I mean, so if I put myself just in the shoes of the friend you were talking to, not necessarily the male partner, either way, the 3 parts to a trigger is there's the triggering event. And the funny thing about events is it can be almost anything. It can be a micro expression on the face of your partner. It can be a gesture. It can be a tone of voice. It can be words. It can be actions. So there is some sort of triggering event, and I'll do more of the summary here. And that event then causes a triggered emotion within you. And so whether that's defensiveness, whether that's frustration, anger, upset, disrespected, you just want to start to notice that that emotion is getting elicited within you. And now normally what happens with triggers is that emotion drives an action or a behavior that's usually unconscious. You don't have to be around for it. You don't choose it. You just say it. You just do it. And that's really the part you want to keep from happening. So the third part is the triggered behavior. And now most of the time that happens without you having to even be aware of it. So if you're really out to change that, start to notice and go back, okay, what was the event that triggered me?
Mm-hmm.
What was the emotion? Sadness, fear, upset, anger. And then what is the action that drives? And now you want to start to insert a space where you could choose a different action than the one that would automatically happen.
And here's what's interesting. What you just said about my partner is my biggest hater, or even for some of you listening and they're like, okay, maybe they're not my biggest hater, but they're definitely not feeling supportive to me. In that moment, when they do the thing that's triggering you and making you feel like they don't support me, consider they're triggered.
Yeah.
Have you gotten interested in what triggered them? What was it? Was it something you said, did, and then what did it elicit in them? Have you ever asked them like, oh, what are you feeling? When you say those things to me, number one, that triggers me, but also what's coming up for you in those moments? So get curious for your partner who you consider isn't supporting you or isn't on that growth journey. Get curious about what's coming up for them.
So good. You know, it's interesting because in this conversation, Elliot happened to be in the room, and he just has that ability to bring just such a different perspective, because in a lot of ways he could relate to what this woman was sharing. You know, Elliot works a corporate job. He has entrepreneurship in him, and we do build some things together. But he said, in just like the most loving and like showing kind of like you just did, a different perspective, said, consider that like maybe that's a response of him really protecting you. Because it's a different perspective from someone who's not on the inside, doesn't know the entrepreneurship journey. It can occur as radical that we operate in the way that we do in building a business, right? So it's just such a good reminder that, gosh, how much do we just make up quote unquote the truth about what someone else is thinking or feeling, or where that communication is coming from?
Yeah.
Well, actually, you just bridged to the exact place that I wanted to share around triggers, because the self-reflection part is then to say, going back, okay, I had this triggered event, meaning my partner said this or that. So it's not that you go to your partner and say, hey, I get triggered when you say this or that. I need you to stop that so I don't get triggered. It's really about you going back and saying, what meaning am I giving that event? So when she says, I assume that she was a she you were talking to, my partner's not supportive. Well, can you look at what is an action, i.e. event, that you are giving the meaning to that he is not supportive? And then I think to myself, well, then how do I bring this conversation up? Well, that's really where I would start, is to go to your partner and say, hey, I don't know if this is true or not, but I notice that I get triggered when you do X, and it's because I make that mean that you're not supporting me in my journey. And maybe what you say is, is that true? And it's really just a way to open that up, because then maybe your partner says, no, that's not true at all, and explains maybe his perspective of what his action was there for. Is like, no, I was actually there to support you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And there is maybe a conversation in which they do say, well, to be honest, yeah, I'm not supporting you. You're like, well, why is that? And then you may get to a place where we talked to somebody this past week where he had left a job to pursue going back to school. So he wasn't bringing in the income, and he was actually embarrassed to ask about things he could get for himself. And he was embarrassed to make decisions around finances because he wasn't bringing that in. And maybe as an entrepreneur, that's what's going on. Maybe sometimes our male egos are a little fragile. And if we don't feel like we're contributing to the level of value we feel like we should be bringing, then I might not be supporting you being super successful. It seems weird, but if you bring that up and he is able to explore, you know what, I kind of feel shameful that you're making a lot more money than me. it at least brings you to, well, then what are we doing here together? I want to support you, but until you open that up, it's going to keep on seeming like they're not.
So brilliant. And, it all boils down to the communication piece. I mean, I think we've all been in work that has had us learn these skills over time. But like you pointed out, when you were even sharing the journey of starting your business, a lot of these tools they aren't just readily available. So we fall into default communication patterns which bring about more of the same. And so what I think most excited about your new book is to have you, and I'll have you even give a preview of, the communication styles and types, and you can tell me the exact phrase and that you've given it. But I think this alone, if people read this book, even if they just listen to this podcast and really get this alone, I think it can honestly transform any relationship that's important to you. So do you guys want to break that down for us?
Yeah. So what you're referring to is what we call the 4 communication personality types. Because here's what's interesting, right? We see all the memes online. Communication is the key to a relationship. And then, a lot of times, let's say the female is pursuing self-development first. She's like, I am communicating more. And it only pushes him away more. Like, he's not communicating the same way, even though he read the book with me. So what we discovered through thousands of conversations and research and workshops and all the things is communication is not one size fits all. And sometimes when people learn a communication principle, they go, okay, well, my partner didn't do it the exact way we learned, or that I'm doing it.
Like, oh gosh, that was me.
Yeah, me too.
Guilty,
right? And so
guilty.
many of us. And so without knowing the 4 communication personality types that we do go much more into the book, we even have some cool visuals for people because we know people are visual learners a lot of times, is without knowing them, you can continue to create resistance between the two of you because you initiate conversations and you have conversations for your type and not for their type. So to give you kind of a breakdown of what each of them are, and it's actually a 2x2 model. And on one scale is assertiveness to being reserved, and the other scale is flexibility to inflexibility. Now we could define those in a moment here, but the 4 types are assertive, inflexible, assertive, flexible, reserved, inflexible, and reserved, flexible.
Oh, okay, so cool.
Before people start to type themselves and go, okay, I am for sure assertive, flexible, right? Like, because people want to see themselves as like, no, I'm flexible in a relationship. Here's the tricky thing about assertiveness.
Well, one key thing you said is you can kind of fall into a different personality type in different places, your work, with friends, with family. So we are talking about within the relationship. And your dynamic can change. We're dynamic human beings. But as Jocelyn was about to say, it's really when you're in a triggered state, you want to see which type do you default to.
Yes, great point.
When we're not at our best.
Right.
Yeah.
When we're unconsciously reacting, right? And so with the assertiveness piece, because some people go, well, I'm assertive. I speak my mind when I'm upset, right? I say it like it is. I tell my partner. That's more of what we would call reactive assertiveness, which is you're asserting yourself when you're upset. The true healthy assertiveness that you want to aim for is how open and willing you are to be proactive in sharing your thoughts, your needs, your feelings, and your desires. Keyword being proactive. So that's the assertiveness scale. Now,
well, and one quick thing too, it's really about yourself too, because it's easy for us to see assertiveness and then make commands and demands. But we're talking about assertiveness where you're sharing your needs, desires, fears, expectations proactively. So it's really more about you allowing yourself to be known, assertiveness, rather than, again, commanding something from someone.
I got excited even tying it to the conversation right before about, oh, my partner's not on board.
Yes.
Self-development. You might be like, no, I've asserted myself. I tell them that I want them to go into self-development. I want them to come to this business workshop with me. Consider that if you were to actually maybe assert yourself, and before you even bring up the workshop or the hiring Lindsay, things like that, you would say, hey, I realize that there's something I really want to do for my business because I'm fired up. I'm so inspired by this vision I have. And just to like be open with you, I actually have a fear that you will not be excited by it. And maybe you'll even
That's
not want me to do it or not support me.
Mm-hmm.
So assertiveness can even be proactively revealing the fear.
Yeah. So good.
And telling them that. So we could go so much more into the 4 types,
So
but that's
good.
an overview.
Yeah. Okay. So obviously there's so much more in the book, even just like we're going to have everyone follow your social media, because the tools that you give, I was saying, and sometimes when you are, good friends with people and their brilliance, it can be easy just to assume that they know how brilliant they are. But I was saying when we got on, I was like, you're the information and tools you've been sharing, even on your social media recently, have been so simple and yet so powerful. I think the word I used was fire. They are fire right now, which is the cool kids way of saying like just every single one hits on, doesn't matter how evolved you feel like you are. I need these reminders every single day because my marriage is the most important relationship to me. My business relationships, my friend relationships are so important to me that it is up to me to make this learning about better communication a priority. So I'm just so grateful that you two have like taken the time to sit down, learn the lessons yourself, and coach so many people through it that you've learned and seen just what we need to hear, what the people need to hear.
Yeah, thank you so much for saying that. And I think it does have so much to do with the practice ourselves, and they just come from our own life and then pursuing like, what's the skill here? And not like an idea or a concept. Like when we're in it, what is the thing that we say? That's really what we wanted to get down to, because it has to be useful and practical to make a difference, not just an idea. Because when you're in a triggered state, you don't have time to think back to some concept of attachment or detachment or some psychological principle. You want something to say and do in that moment, or to at least change a perspective about conflict, which is even primarily the big concept of the book.
Yeah. So you both have been so generous as well with really sharing the things you go through in your relationship. And I think examples are always really, really powerful for people to really get this conversation about the different communication personality types. So give us an example of in your relationship, how applying that format really has, given you new breakthroughs, new connection in your communication. And I'm like, you're both smiling. I'm like, I'm sure there's some good stories here.
Oh yeah. So I fall into, as you probably all can tell, assertive. And
what?
We started the relationship where I was definitely more in the assertive, inflexible. And he started the relationship really reserved, inflexible. Now we have
that is key.
And
Some might say reserved, flexible, but it's you have to be honest with yourself to get to the reserved, inflexible, which I was.
Okay, break down the inflexible piece, because I actually think this is going to be so key to what you're about to share, because I actually was wondering that too.
Go ahead.
So from reserved, inflexible, more of the difficult one because it's much more subtle. So the inflexibility has to do with, once again, I had more of an unwillingness to adjust my perception, my behaviors, or my action. However, when it's in a reserved type, it's not going to be getting expressed. So what it sounds like is we would get into a disagreement, and it's easy place to be a compliant yes, which is something that comes from Chris Voss, Never Split the Difference, lead FBI negotiator. So as a reserve type, I would give that lip service. Yeah, I'll do that. Yes, that sounds like a good idea, which on the surface sounds like I'm on board, but with the inflexibility in my mind, I'm like, I'm not doing that. But I'm not saying it out loud, right? Or for a lot of us men, we will say that, but still being inflexible to like look at our own perspectives or our own triggers. All we're doing is pushing away to get out of this uncomfortable situation in which we don't have the words to express our emotions. So it's a way to just get past it. Yeah, I'll do that. Can we just get past it? And I said that so many times, and many men have that response. Yeah. Can we just move past this already? But if you do that, you really miss the deeper levels of connection that become possible.
And so love that example. And on my side with the assertive, inflexible, one thing that really has made a difference, because again, a lot of people, the whole saying opposites attract, like sometimes people don't know really what that is. And a lot of it has to do with, we see a lot of couples are one assertive, one reserved. But reserved doesn't mean that they're shy. Like, for example, Elliot's not a shy person, but he processes and shares his emotions and thoughts differently than you do.
Yep.
Right. So he would, even though he's a really outgoing, generous, social person, he'd still fall into, on my like assessment of him, as being in that reserved space. So my point is, for the assertive type, I had to really learn that if I blindsided him with topics because I wanted to talk about them right then in that moment, because I can process it right out there, it would push him away and it would make him resistant. And then it would create tension and then potentially lead to a disagreement.
Or you could say shut down, just to be a little bit different than like push away means I might just not have the ability to continue the conversation. I might be standing there.
Yes. Yeah.
But like shut down, not have anything to say, kind of be confused.
Yes. Great. So what I really learned is like a quick tip for people who are like, okay, yes, I fall into that assertive, I resonate with this, is I give him a heads up if there's something I want to talk about. Seems so simple that you're probably like, that can't make a big difference. It's huge. From everything, whether we're going to talk about starting a family, moving, anything.
I can't be blindsided with that one.
Right. So let's have a baby.
Right. I want to talk about this right. No, it really is work to do it in the moment. So I give him a heads up and I get his buy-in that he's open to talking about it right then, or if there's a different time to talk about it. That's it. I mean, we could give you a ton of different like examples, but that's one.
Well, and even just those examples are so groundbreaking, like to really sit. And I think it'll help people once they get the book, really have that honesty piece. Because I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of us have inflexibility at our core. That again, it's just that self-awareness piece. If we want to move into a more flexible place, we first have to see where we're being inflexible. Yeah. So good. Okay. So I hope I didn't take you too far off to then share the example you were going to share about just the dynamic between that for you both.
I think a big one is what I just shared about how I used to just bring things up when I wanted to talk about them.
Yeah.
And so by giving him the heads up was a big deal. One other thing that really helped on the other way is where he would take more time to process a thought or an emotion. Like let's say something came up with his family or anything, even between us, he would just kind of get quiet and I wouldn't really have access to what was going on. And so then I would almost like probe more, like open up more. Hello, like, where are you? Knock, knock. And he didn't really know what to say. He's like, I'm not sure. I don't know, especially when he was really working on identifying his feelings. Cause a lot of men are even unlearning that it's, I can open up my emotions. I can share what's coming up. Now what he does as a quick, tip, we like to give little tips that can make a difference, is he even just tells me, hey, I'm thinking about that. Like I actually need to process that. I don't have an answer right in this moment, but I am thinking about it.
Well, that's a real life example. So 2 places would be deciding to, for the time being, sell our house and move away from Arizona, move to Charlotte, as well as the conversation we're in now about having a kid. So for the assertive, like Jocelyn, and reserved, like myself, if she was to keep like bringing it up in my occurring, I start to get annoyed. Like, I've heard you say that. I know I got that. But being my reserved, I'm not really letting her know where I'm at with that.
Yeah.
So I just am like stewing in my own resentment. So she would keep on saying, well, I've lived here my whole life. I want to try a new place. And then I would say like, yeah, I got it. And then she'd bring it up in a few hours and the next day. And I'm like inside getting frustrated. So
How about now?
Exactly. And so as a reserved person, I had to start to move towards a little more assertiveness by acknowledging first what she's saying. Hey, I really hear you have a desire to explore and be more adventurous and see different places, right? And then say, well, I'm not there yet. So let's come back to this in half a day. Let me process that. Let me look up some places. And so it gave me more freedom to be with my emotion. And then I was furthering the conversation by saying, we're going to come back to this, which now she's not asking me like over and over, but that was something I had to learn as a reserve, to speak up a little bit, to acknowledge that like I heard what she said and I want to continue, but then put a request on when I wanted to have that conversation again.
Like, this is so good. We could literally just keep going for hours. I know, but I want to just first acknowledge like the work that you're both doing and the ripple effect it's having in marriages, in friendships, and partnerships. It really is like I can't believe that this kind of work didn't exist for couples before, but also so grateful that you answered the call and started to create it. Truly. So I know people are going to be wondering where to get the book. At the time you hear this, you guys, it'll be available for pre-order, which is actually exciting because there's bonuses for pre-ordering, and then it'll come out this spring. So tell us all the details about that, what it's called. We haven't even revealed the name yet, and then where people can find it.
So the book is called The Argument Hangover, which is the phrase we use to describe the period of time between the disagreement that lasts all the way up until you're fully resolved and reconnected emotionally. And so the whole book is designed to give you very relatable, like we're not putting just like cheesy concepts in here that you're like, I can't do anything with this. We give like prompts, we give examples of how it could be initiated. We give examples
the wrong way to do
it. The wrong way, like very practical. Because again, we've had literally thousands of conversations. So we just have such direct insight into like what couples are doing, what's not working. And so anyway, it's all about conflict and communication and being able to really understand each other better, especially the communication personality types is huge. So anyway, it's packed with value. Like you said, for pre-order, it's worth not waiting because we're giving $200 worth of pre-order bonuses, including a workbook to debrief after a conflict with really great questions so that you can have better conflicts in the future and even discover like what was the benefit of that disagreement. So the workbook, and then we have 2 trainings that go into emotional triggers, conflict, communication, listening, like even actually being a better listener, because people are like, yeah, I need to work on being a better listener. We have ways to actually become a better listener. And so all of those can be claimed at theargumenthangover.com. You'll see an area where all the retailers are linked, and you'll see where to just put your receipt number and you get the bonuses right away. So we're having people like dozens every day pre-order. So don't wait. Like it's so worth getting those pre-order bonuses ordering now.
Oh my gosh. Okay. And we'll link all of it in the show notes, including your social media where people can find you. So here's kind of a question that did pop up in my mind, because in the past, this would have been me. I would have heard this amazing interview, been like, yes, personal development for my relationship. Let's go, like all about it. And there was definitely a time that Elliot was on a different journey. So what would be, let's say someone's listening and they're like, I really would love to invite my partner to read this book with me, to like go on this journey with me. Let's say partners aren't maybe on the exact same gung-ho, excited to dive into this type of work, or what their perception of this type of work. That's really what it is. What would be the most powerful way to make that invitation?
Funny enough, I was reviewing our book for some things we're doing. And in the beginning, I almost forgot we had included this. One of the first pages is a letter that you could show your partner.
I didn't know about this, you guys.
Yeah.
I forgot about it too.
Yeah. It shares in a really empowering, non-confronting, not even like too big of an idea for your relationship, a way to invite your partner to read it with you. And so I think that's a great way to even just show them the letter. Like, here's why I'm not showing this to mean we're broken and something's wrong with us and you need to fix you. The letter really displays like, I really like love our relationship so much that I just want to learn ways to understand you better. If you phrase it that way, like if you go to your partner and you're like, we need to read this book because our communication is crap and you aren't good when you fight. Of course, they're going to be like, that doesn't feel good. Yeah. But if you share like, I actually want to know more about you. Like maybe I realized I don't totally know how to communicate with your personality type, and I actually want to know how I can be better in our conflicts. That will come off so different. So read the letter, like show them the letter in the beginning of the book, and then initiate it in a way that shows them you just really want to get to know even them more and be an even better partner for them.
So brilliant. So good.
I want to speak to the letter actually, because I forgot that was in there. It's almost like when you were in, let's say, elementary school and you handed a note to someone that you liked that said, do you like me? Yes, or definitely yes. like there's no option.
Yes.
So it brings some humor. I remember the letter actually says, invites them into this from a positive intent. And I think it says, yes, absolutely yes. And then the third one is, I'm already in chapter 2, catch up.
So good. Oh my goodness. Well, I know we pre-ordered our copies months ago and cannot wait to get them. But truly, I cannot wait to watch the ripple effect that this book makes in the world. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having us. We love you.
Love you.